Well, welcome everybody to the October community meeting. And we're going to dive into some project updates. First of all, remember that ArgoCon North America is coming up alongside KubeCon as a co-located event. That'll be in Salt Lake City in November. So make sure you register, get funding from your respective employers if you can, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Yeah, if we just check out the event here, November 12th, and you can find the schedule here. If you go to the full ArgoCon schedule, you can see what's going on here. You can RSVP or register for talks you want to attend. Yeah, a bunch of great workflows talks, dog food delight, about doing CI with Argo Workflows, Metaflow and Argo Workflows for AI ML, yeah, hybrid cloud with Argo Workflows, CI/CD with all the Argo tools. There's a bunch of things. We also have a talk by Alan, who's here and is going to speak today a bit about the tracing. I must have just missed that one.
Untangling the threads.
Untangling. Okay, there we go. Yes, thanks for calling out. I saw JM's name, not yours. So we'll talk about a little bit of a preview of this talk today, which is cool. The last one that's great to mention is a full Argo Events architecture deep dive. So hopefully you can catch that one by my co-founder JP and Becky Pauley from JetStack. Yeah, bunch of good Argo Workflows events talks this time around. Don't forget to register. And back to our agenda. So we will go into the release candidate update by Alan, and then Alan, you'll take it away with tracing as well. So yeah, I'll just pull up the release candidate really quick in GitHub here. You can find these in the changelog. We're now on release candidate 2. And Alan will talk about release candidate 3 that's coming up soon. And hopefully we'll be letting that fully bake and released around ArgoCon, KubeCon. So yeah, really excited for that. First minor release in about a year. So we're looking forward to getting that out. And yeah, Alan, I'll turn it over to you for the more interesting details.
No problem. Right.
Yeah.
So there's a blog posting on ArgoProj that covers up to release candidate 2 at the moment. I've got to update it when RC3 is released. Some of the highlights, this is obviously subjective. Some of these might be things that you don't care about, and so feel free to ask questions. Cron workflows have got a load of improvements. They're probably one of the bigger changes between three different people. We've got the ability to schedule a single cron workflow with multiple cron schedules. So the schedule stanza is now a schedule, so you can list several different things in there, and they're all associated with a single cron. You can also put an expression into your cron workflow to say when it should stop scheduling anymore. So you could have it so that if it starts erroring a lot, you could stop it, or you could just create a cron that only runs 10 times and then stops itself. Something like that. And I'm sure there's plenty more uses people will come up with for that stop strategy. And alongside that, my teammate Esther has added a when clause. So this is every time that the schedule hits the cron workflow, it will then evaluate another expression, the when expression, to see whether it should actually run the cron workflow or it should skip it. So this allows you some flexibility. One of the uses I've got a PR open to document is that you can now use that to schedule once a day, even in the presence of daylight saving. So if you know how daylight saving works, often at 2 o'clock in the morning, the clock jumps around. So if you wanted to schedule something between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock on a day where the clock jumped from 2 to 3, it wouldn't get scheduled. So you could now use the when expression and schedule it twice a day, but use the when expression to skip the second scheduled time and just run it once a day, but genuinely once a day, every day of the year. And the same thing if you're doing the jump backwards, where it would otherwise get scheduled twice. If you put it at 1:30, when it hits 2 o'clock, it goes back to 1 o'clock. And so you'd hit 1:30 twice in the same day, which would be bad. I can demo a few of the UI things. Here's a copy of my own personal build. It's not actually RC2, but it's based on RC2. I'm going to use this to demo tracing, which is not in 3.6 at all. We've got titles. This is JM, who's doing my talk with me, has added the ability to put markdown in your title, so you can have like links in the description, title and description both take this. So that's really cool. We've got the ability to show various fields as their original view, which is how many seconds ago, but also an absolute time format. You can do that in here with a node. You can go down and switch those to absolute time formats, and it remembers that across different views. So if I go and look at this one, start times are always displayed in absolute times. What else have we got with workflow templates? So if you have a cron workflow, I don't have any cron workflow, so I can't show you that, but you could see the executions of the cron workflow at the bottom. Now with workflow templates, if you've submitted them through the UI by pressing this button here, then it starts executing them, but you've lost track of them then. But if we go back to that one, they're all listed down the bottom, and there we go. It's just finishing that one that I've just submitted. So you've got a list here. That's really cool. What else have I set up to demo? Oh, you can see input artifact directories. Where's that one? I've got one of those. Artifact passing. Here we go. You can see what directory that those those files that I've generated I've used as output artifacts, where they've gone, and then you can see where they come to on the far side. So that's really cool. You can view line numbers in a place where you couldn't view them before, and I think those are the main things I can demo in the user interface. One of the big things I worked on was new metrics. Some of those are demoable here. We've got a version of the workflow controller. So this is our production system at Pipekit. And now we can see which version it is running at any one time, and you'll be able to see version upgrades as they happen, and they'll be logged in your metric store. You've got various things that enable counting of workflows better. You can count number of executions of workflows across your entire day much more easily than you used to be able to, because some things that used to be gauges are now counters. You can also look at your individual workflow template runs. So we're not looking at the same cluster as I was demoing just now, but we can see our renovate. We run renovate regularly, which is a workflow template. Grafana's just lost the previous entry for this. That looks weird. It looks weird anyway. If we go back to the last 6 hours, we can see renovate runs on a 2-hourly boundary, and we get 3 runs of it. So this is because it's used via a workflow template ref. So where we use things via a workflow template ref, they get counted against the workflow template that they ran. And so you can monitor the usage of workflow templates if you follow good practice and do workflow template refs for all of your workflows. You can also, another one I'm quite proud of, you can monitor why your pods are pending. So sometimes we have people going, why is my workflow not running? And diagnosing pending after the event is quite difficult to do. So this parses the pending reason and takes the beginning part of it only, because, for example, unschedulable tells you how many nodes there are, and then you get massive cardinality explosion if you don't shrink this. In terms of your metric labels become extremely expensive to store. So here we know we've got 55 events of pending, which were unschedulable. We also appear to have some negative numbers. That seems a bit weird. There we go, something for me to investigate. So we have a little bit of image pull. We expect to get a bit of image pull failure. We also really do expect to get unschedulable because we're running a extremely dynamically sized cluster. We're running CI on it. So when we run CI, it needs to go and purchase some new nodes using Carpenter from AWS. And so we expect them to be unscheduled until the new nodes have appeared. So this is not an error for us, but yeah, that's some of the new metric stuff. Some of the other big changes we've talked about, cron workflow changes that I'm not going to demo. There's a lot of changes to the OSS artifact driver. So if you are using OSS to store your artifacts, they are now sort of feature complete, I believe. You can also use multiple locks, mutexes and semaphores in the same workflow. So that's a thing that various people have asked for, one of the longest standing bugs that's been closed. There are various performance things that have gone in. Yeah. Any questions? No?
Yeah, a lot of great fixes. Some big bugs like the mutex and semaphore one you just mentioned. And then, yeah, hopefully all of the metrics enhancements will help everybody have better observability over their workflows. Yeah, easier debugging experience and should be available in any observability provider tool you're using. So looking forward to y'all's feedback on that. And we will keep iterating and improving metrics going into future versions as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thanks, Alan, for walking us through that. And
so
yeah, go ahead.
Shall I move on? I'll move on to tracing.
Yeah.
So tracing is sort of closely associated with the metrics. If you haven't come across tracing before, let me show you what a trace might look like. I'm going to grab DAG Diamond. It's my favorite demo thing. So DAG Diamond is a DAG that splits out, runs A, followed by BC, followed by D. And in the main user interface, you can see how that got scheduled. And that's all you can see. What now happens, or in my current feature branch that I'm working on, this is going via port forwards and it's a little bit chunky. So let's hope it's going to work.
Fun.
Yeah, I should have put some proper ingresses on this, but it's occasionally times out badly. The curse of a demo. I could go and restart my port forwards.
All good.
So let's go back and click the link again. No, it's the curse of the demo, isn't it?
It's trying to link directly to the trace from the UI.
Yeah, it was working. It's been working for a few days. Now, of course, it's not. Doesn't appear to be selected. Maybe if I select that manually, it'll.
Yeah.
It's not linking to the correct data provider. I'm going to grab the.
Yeah, it's not going to tempo. That's weird.
So what we've got here is we've got OpenTelemetry operator that's injecting information into the workflow controller and the running pods to allow them to share information through the OpenTelemetry collector, and that information, the traces, then get put into Grafana Tempo, and I'm trying to view them in Tempo. So the trouble is with this is you can't pull the information out of that, so I need to grab the trace ID from here and not go there, go here, go to Tempo, tell it the trace ID, and hope that it works. There we go. So this is a trace. This is a bunch of tracing information. So a trace is a one-off span that has a bunch of child spans. So the top level thing is the trace, and then there are a bunch of spans that belong to it. And spans are a time start and a time end. So here we have the workflow controller has made a workflow, and that runs for, if I click on it, it tells me exactly how long it ran for, 1 minute, 2 seconds. And then it went straight into the running phase. There was no delay on that. Oops, I've shrunk everything down. That's no use. And then it created a node for A, a node for B and C, and down here, a node for D. So if I fiddle that so that we only see the things that we were looking at before, we can say, let's only look at the nodes. We can see a very, very similar trace to what we were seeing in the user interface before for showing the time that the nodes ran for. This looks different from the other one where there were gaps. Let's show you that. Back diamond. This has got gaps between them. So this is what I was showing you here is the workflow controller's view of the world. If I switch instead to the weight container's view of the world, so this is inside the running nodes, they're also emitting metrics. So the pods that run your workflow are also emitting metrics showing how long they thought they were running for. So if we those match up with what you can see here, which is the actual execution of the nodes, but we can compare that by remove the filter. We can see the node ran, so that's the view of the workflow controller versus the view of the actual pod, which gives us a bit more information about how the workflow controller and the pods are interacting with each other. You can see here that the node went into phase pending. It goes into phase pending again. This is slightly cryptic. This is actually whilst it's in the init container. There's a change of state, but I don't register it properly yet because I haven't finished that bit. And we can see it attempts to load some artifacts in the init container, but there's no artifacts to load, so it takes very little time. You can see the init container took 300 milliseconds, which is not super quick. Maybe we can optimize it. So we're getting information that's useful to lots of different people. At the moment, I just splurge all of the tracing information out, and there's no filtering on it. So that's a thing that will need to be fixed in order that people can get the information that they care about in production systems versus when they're trying to diagnose problems. The trace information and the gets passed down actually into the pod that runs, so that the executing code within the pod can also emit useful traces that get put into this spans, sorry, so that they can also join on to the overall trace. So in this case, Dag Diamond, the pod itself has this code. Let's find the right place. This is what's happening inside the pod. It's a bit of shell script using an open source project called ArgoCon CLI, which is a command line interface to allow you to emit traces. And it runs that 3 times with 3 different names: sleep, party, and clean, just because that's what I want to go to a party, which actually executes the command sleep, command sleep, command sleep. So there should be 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 5 seconds. If we go back here, we've got sleep, 3 seconds, party, 5 seconds. It's a short party. Takes quite a long time to clean up, same amount of time as a party, but you can then emit traces that get joined on. So this whole thing can keep on going down and down and down if you want to. In theory, build kit can emit traces. So if you were running build kit and you injected the trace ID enough, the build kit could then start adding on to your traces and you get nested traces. And then you can take this information and turn it into metrics if you'd like to. So perhaps your build kit times are getting longer and longer and longer, and you can start diagnosing why and having some metrics and some alerts on that kind of thing. Any questions so far?
Nice. I'll dive in maybe after, yeah, your next phase here. I have a couple questions, but go ahead.
All right. I've got another quick demo. This one is a really dull workflow that generates two artifacts, and then this pod consumes those two artifacts. Now, the artifacts are really big. If I look at the manifest, I can't remember how big they are. Several. What is that? 500 meg? Maybe 500, maybe 5 gig. I can't remember. Enough to make it take some time. Anyway, so we can look at the trace for that. I'm going to click the button anyway, even though we kind of know it doesn't work. Hey, this time it works.
It worked.
The curse of the demo has been lifted. So interestingly, those artifacts are really tiny, are really compressible because they're just zeros basically. So it in the first pod, I should probably bring up my. So hold on. In my first pod, I don't have any input artifacts, but I do generate two output artifacts. So here's the first pod generating those two files. It took 43 seconds. And then down here, you can see where it saves the artifacts. And it took only 229 milliseconds. So they must have still remained in such a state that the compression took no time at all. I've added a couple of events into this. Now they're really hard to see here, so I'll explain events in a second, but the two files are separately timed. The second pod doesn't actually do anything with the artifacts, but does take a horrifically long 1 minute 25 seconds to load both those artifacts. Here we can see the events for the two different files. The two files are the same file as each other, so they should take the same amount of time, but you can see the events. This is when it starts on file 1. This is when it starts on file 2. I don't actually know what's going on with the remainder of the time here. So another thing that this is sort of just with playing with it as showing up as, that's interesting. Maybe we want to have a look into it as to why it's taking that time. But that's, you can add onto it where I said a span consists of a name and a start time and an end time. There's various other things, including attributes or labels, if you're coming from a sort of Prometheus style world, extra data, and you can add these events, which are timestamps. They're just like lines in the sand with times in them for when things happened. You can also see I've got a whole bunch of information about task result reconciliation. So I've been investigating what's happening in terms of timing with task result reconciliation. If I go and show you another workflow, maybe this one will allow me to click on the link as well. This is a pseudo data sciencey workflow. It does a bunch of fan in, fan out stuff. Go on. Yay. What we can see is by the end of this, which has done a whole bunch of pods, all the pods here run in parallel, so it's not particularly exciting. When I ran it here, for demo purposes, I actually try and make it run on a constrained cluster, and then it looks much more interesting, and you can see the pending pods and stuff and how long they're taking. But by the end of this, we're doing a lot of task result reconciliation. We haven't actually got that many nodes in this. So it seems to me we could probably optimize some of the reconciliation loop to perhaps delete task result, workflow task results once they have been fully reconciled into the status of the workflow. And also, yeah, probably, or even if we don't delete them from the cluster, we could know that they have been already marked as completed and therefore bypass them a bit. Anyway, yeah, I think that's it for what I was going to demo.
Nice. Thanks, Alan. Yeah, any questions from folks?
Oh, I'm the only one here, so
Hey, yeah, go ahead, Anton.
So I'm curious because I haven't worked in OpenTelemetry in a good bit. So this is mostly out of the box just by using the SDK, right?
It's sort of is. We have the challenge that basically the SDK has not been designed for the kind of thing we want to do. At the moment, it seems impossible to retain a span across two. So a span must be terminated in the same binary, because you don't have a handle to be able to regenerate this or recreate a span in memory so that you can end it later. You can only start spans and end spans. And I had a quick chat with the OpenTelemetry folk about that, but I'm going to try and corner someone at KubeCon and see if I can thrash it out, because it's a bit more, it's a bit tricky. The SDK specification doesn't allow it. There's also the stuff about passing the trace ID down into the various places. But,
Yeah,
yeah. And there's recovering traces. So traces, trace contexts get stored in Golang context.
Yeah.
So you have to have the correct Golang context. So you have to keep, every time you start operate, you have to kind of go and find recover your trace and spans so that your context is correct. Does that make any sense? So you're trying to recover the Golang context for every call to operate in the.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, recover is a different wording that I was thinking of, but yeah, we have to pass through the context everywhere so that you can then add the trace information to it.
But we have to, but we don't have the trace information. So we don't store the context, as in the Golang context, in between calls to operate. So we operate on a workflow, and then that operate terminates, and then later on we do another call to operate to reconcile it a second time. But we need to recover and restore the Golang context so that it's got the correct span, so that any further calls to trace start,
it's the same,
a link
same
to the right place. Yeah. So it's not, I mean, it's not super hard, but it's also extremely busted if your workflow controller restarts in between, because all of that's in memory, and there's no other way of doing it at the moment because of the SDK.
That's not the worst possible thing, since you can lose plenty of other metrics if you have a restart. So it's like somewhat expected, I would say. Yeah,
it's in theory, what we could do is do linked spans, and then we would need to start generating. We would need to know how to find the previous trace ID, and then we could start so we can link spans. That's probably the way it will have to be, unless the SDK changes.
Yeah, I mean, to do that, we would probably need to store the trace ID inside of the spec so we can pull it back out.
But there could be multiple of those if the workflow controller restarts several times. So it's not just because they're not going to be the same trace ID anymore at that point. They're going to be separate trace IDs. Because you're not allowed.
You just
have to link them.
In the case of you have a really long running job, then and your controller restarts in the middle of it, and you want performance to see the performance of the traces of that, then that would be really relevant. Which is a pretty rare case that happens. Both of those happen simultaneously, but that will happen eventually.
It will, and it feels like it feels a little more important for traces to at least be able to, well, maybe it could be that your controller is restarting because of this long running workflow that you'd really like to be able to use tracing to help you understand where it's going
or I
wrong.
mean, in I guess in my experience, usually the case would be like, let's say we have an intentional restart the controller because we're doing a cluster upgrade, and the workflow's still running, but it's a long running job. So, but the controller's on a different node, so the controller gets restarted at a different time than the actual workflow. Or
Yeah.
usually we hold the workflow nodes until they finish, or there's some grace period. Um, so
Yeah.
so the restarts will be differently timed. Yes, in that case, when those two overlap, you will 100% have a controller restart.
Yeah,
And
indeed.
so if you have the hot standby on a different node, I don't think I don't know if that they have the same trace ID either, because they
Well,
have
no,
never.
yeah, it's just it is just an opaque in-memory thing that Hotel doesn't allow you to look inside of. So you can specify the trace ID, but I think the right way to do it is to do linked spans and linked traces. But I haven't implemented any of that at the moment. It doesn't necessarily have to happen in V1, but
Yeah. No, I thanks for the explanation. I was mostly wondering because we do have the feature request for distributed tracing, and I know you were planning to work on that separately, and I was like, oh, it looks like a lot of it we already have without doing as much effort.
yeah, I think the other thing I would like to have before, well, there's a whole load of tidying up to do. I'm just trying to get bits and pieces working. But the other thing I'd like to be able to do is like have, like I did for metrics, being able to switch them on and off, and probably in this case add groups so that you can like switch on controller tracing for
Yeah.
most of the controller tracing that you might want on, but most of the time you're going to want off because you're not really interested in controller performance, and you then turn it on when you're
Yeah,
got
and
a worry.
it affects performance also. That's why in that
Yeah.
issue, I wrote the goal we definitely want it to be optional because it will increase your CPU and memory. So
Yeah,
cool. Yeah, thanks, Alan.
no problem.
Yeah, so Alan, this will be slated not for 3.6, right? But 3.7, at least
Yeah,
most
that's the
likely.
aim. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and then from the user perspective, we're hoping that, yeah, there would be kind of an on-off switch for the controller tracing, right? And then the little feature you showed is if you add traces into any container, this will also pick those up, right? So there's like further layers of tracing besides just the controller that'll be picked up, right?
Yeah, so there's at the moment there's controller tracing, there's Argo exec tracing, all the stuff that happens inside the
Okay.
Argo control part, in the init container and the wait container, and then there's passing that through. I think probably if you've turned on tracing at all, some high level tracing will always happen, like node workflow level, workflow phase, node level, node phase. What I've got in Argo exec at the moment probably will always happen and pass that through, because if you've turned it on, that's the minimum set of stuff you want. And then it will be, I'd like to know some details about interactions with S3 or interactions with the, I don't know, other parts of the system,
Yeah, if you want to
archiving,
be
for
detailed.
example. So you'd be able to have switch on and off some big blocks and maybe some small blocks as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and then if you want increased granularity, that was where you can use the OTel or a similar trace CLI tool to write those traces out
Yeah, for your
into
own.
the
Yeah, that'd be
container.
For your own.
for your own containers. You want to
Yeah.
have those. Yeah, which they is of course the one nuance in distributed trace that you pass the trace ID everywhere, and they have to know how to use it everywhere, which
Yeah.
takes a little bit of everyone, everything passes their own environment variable around, or their own request header around that you have to know how to grab
Yeah.
to pass through. That part
Yeah.
unfortunately is not super standardized.
So that could be
No.
quite powerful if you're writing a lot of, yeah, custom logic into workflows to be able to then trace through your logic and see that, visualize that in your
Yeah.
observability tool.
So it's like end to end, for instance,
Yeah.
at Capital One, we had like you could trace from our API gateway, which had its own trace ID, into our API, which would take that trace ID, and then you could throw that in that hits the workflows API. You could throw that in there, that will pass it to the workflows and then each of the individual containers. You could fully have the entire trace as one giant thing, which so if you wanted to have all the performance details in one place, that would have it. Uh, Rarely do you ever need that much information, but that is what distributed tracing is all about, is that now you can do all of that.
Yeah, I've got no, I'm not doing at the moment anything to do with the user interface side. So if you, I'm not taking trace IDs from
From the API,
the
yeah.
server yet. That's a stage 2 thing at the moment. I'm just trying to get because it's reasonably well understood how to do HTTP tracing, and that would be not that difficult to add. It's the workflow
Connected,
side is
yeah.
not that normal.
Yeah,
Gives
yeah.
it. Yep.
Yes, sorry, I missed the beginning part. I came in a little late. So this is a new feature for 3.7. This isn't part of the existing metric stuff.
No, it's separate from that.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was wondering. For my first question, I was wondering specifically how much of it is just you just use the hotel SDK and get stuff for free, and how much of it do you actually have to add the traces yourself?
I've got none of this is done with the library there's no magic libraries happening at all yet. None of the hotel magic injection is doing anything here, because none of it would help so far. If we want to bring it out to the server, yes, it would help there. But yeah, none of
for context, sure, gotcha.
we don't use any libraries. Maybe probably AWS S3 would do stuff for us, but most of the libraries that we use inside the controller wouldn't trace anything that we care about. You wouldn't get the workflow, which is tracing the workflow in the nodes is the more interesting part of it.
It would be interesting to see traces of the informers, but if Kubernetes could implement that, that would be cool. But
yeah, I think we should be able to get that. But the trouble is, what trace ID do you associate with an informer thing?
yeah, great question.
Yeah. So yes, there's a sort of, we would like to get some traces for non-workflow, well, non-invoked things. There's no human causing and there's nothing to associate it with as an event from the outside as the top level trace. So
theoretically, the top level trace could either you have one global trace of just the controller running, or for each reconciliation loop of the informer, that could be its own trace.
yes, so I have done workflow reconciliation. So the operate call is there. So that was so I wanted to know whether, yeah, so again, that's associated with the overall trace, but it can't be associated with anything below the trace. It's just, so this is the trace for the workflow, but there's no, like, it's not associated with a node. It's not associated with anything much. Yeah, I think probably for the internal other gubbins of the workflow controller, maybe we'd run a trace per hour or something and just associate all the informer stuff with that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Problem for later.
You might be able to associate per node, because if it's a workflow task result, that'd be really confusing.
Yeah, so the workflow, yeah, but you can't associate it because the operator might not be operating on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, we could in theory recover. So one of the functions I've written is to be able to recover the context for a workflow. So yes, I guess you could then go and associate it with the workflow. Yeah, that might work when when you get an add or update or delete. At that point, you could associate it with the trace for the workflow. Yeah, that would work. But you can't like the relist or whatever, there's nothing to associate with.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the demo, Alan, today. And yeah, for folks here or watching the recording, we're demoing this to get feedback. I think what's the best way to share feedback, Alan? Is it on the the issue or the PR, we can share that as
I don't
well.
have a PR open yet. It's going to be a while on that one.
I was thinking you could potentially share this recording on the issue, and then you could ask for feedback there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do that. So yeah, we'll link that in the YouTube recording too. But yeah, thanks for putting this together, Alan, and good to see you, Anton. Thanks for the questions too. And we'll meet up at KubeCon. So probably next month we won't have a community meeting, but in December we'll get another community meeting going. So yeah, let us know if any other demos or presentations, and we'll get them on the agenda. Have a
Awesome.
good one.
Thanks, Kaden.
Hey guys.